Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with my colleagues, Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson, talking about the debt limit bill that passed the House, now moves to the Senate as we speak today. It is expected to pass after such a big vote in the House. Senators are probably not eager to delay things, want to get out of town. It'll pass, the same bill likely to pass. So this is an interesting case study, Kim. You have McCarthy, who was written off as a fundamentally weak speaker after he had to bargain for the votes to become speaker. It doesn't look like Nancy Pelosi here. It doesn't look like Joe Cannon, historically strong speakers yet. But nonetheless, I think he's toppled the Beltway conventional wisdom to some extent. And I'll say that the key here, the real key of getting anything, was the House passing its own debt ceiling bill. White House didn't believe McCarthy could do it. Schumer didn't believe McCarthy could do it. He did it. And by doing that, he put the onus on the White House to respond and negotiate. And I think the lesson here, the power of 218. When you have the majority, narrow or large, you get to 218, you have leverage. You don't have leverage, and you got to go hat in hand with the Democrats, and the whole policy framework moves left. You get to 218, then you have the ability to really change things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also worth looking at how he got to 218, because this was actually very deliberate. One thing he did is he decided that he was not going to take the old path of just putting the conservative bloc on the sidelines and trying to go around them. It just wasn't going to work with a 4-person majority. So instead, he deputized Representative Garrett Graves, who has very good relations with all the 5 different caucuses on the Republican side. And they spent months negotiating, bringing everybody into the process, making sure that everybody got some of their demands, balancing everything between those who are more concerned about defense and those that really wanted to see steeper cuts, and ended up with this bill where they really did bring everybody along. Similarly, when they were negotiating with the White House, Graves and Patrick McHenry, who was the other lead negotiator, lots of feedback coming back to the members. I think that helped. It didn't keep him the Freedom Caucus in the end, but that was almost always going to be impossible. Okay. I mean, don't forget that some of those Freedom Caucus members didn't vote for the first bill because they felt it didn't go far enough. And so when you're dealing with this White House, there was never any way they were going to get the demands that many of these members needed to come along. It's just unfortunate. I think the other thing he did, he was super transparent. He spent a lot of time talking to the press. He really kind of led the narrative on this with constant pressure on the White House, respectful, but constant pressure that they needed to be the ones to now move. And you started to see that narrative a bit, and more pressure being put on the White House to play ball. So some of this, I think, was luck. And I think that in the end, Biden made a mistake in waiting so long to negotiate, looking as though the White House was doing nothing. I think Schumer made the mistake of underestimating what the House Republicans might do. So some luck, but a lot of this was a very deliberate strategy. And I do think McCarthy gets some credit for that.
Well, I agree with that. Now, one corollary benefit here, Kyle, in my view, is that this exercise, however imperfect, and it's not a perfect bill, there's a lot more that needs to be done from a fiscal reform and policy reform point of view. In that sense, Chip Roy and those guys are right. But what this showed is that McCarthy and the House Republicans, since being elected, are showing that they can govern. They are showing voters that if you, having elected for us, you can get some things done, not just symbolic votes in the House, but actually put points on the board by passing some things. And you can compromise. And the whole Democratic critique that Biden is attempting, and Schumer, and it's every phrase, every statement, is the MAGA Republicans are crazy, they're nuts, they run the House, they can't get anything done. This shows the opposite, Kyle. I think this is going to have political benefits for the Republican Party going forward and helps them as they try to do other things, and maybe, just maybe, there's a lot of time left, but maybe helps them in 2024.
And that was not foreordained. I mean, think back to that crazy fight over the speakership when Kevin McCarthy was running, and it took him days to get elected. We had the ballot after ballot after ballot, and opposition candidates put up against him, and he was struggling to get the majority. There was a lot of questions about what is the next 2 years going to look like, and can McCarthy hold this caucus together? And I agree that I think a little bit of success here makes more success in the future likelier, because obviously he has led to this result, and not everybody in the Republican Party in the House conference is satisfied with it, but 149 of them at least are, and maybe a few others are more satisfied than they're letting on in public. They're posturing a little bit because they know it's going to pass, and if it were really a question of is the United States going to default, maybe they would vote for it. But I agree. I think that helps him. I think it makes any attempts to depose him more unlikely. Even some of his critics are saying that that doesn't seem to be the approach. Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, dissenter on this debt ceiling deal, says to threaten to kick him out now, that's not right. And so now we have to see how he can carry that momentum forward as we get into, like we were talking about earlier, the farm bill or the appropriations process, and use this as an example of when Republicans stick together, when we work by the rule of 218 and we pass something, that puts the ball in President Biden's court, and that's how we get something done.
Kim, what do you think this impact has on President Biden? Obviously, he's been down in the polls, but, he did do the deal. It's getting through. And he had promised to be a centrist, a compromiser, a deal maker. Hadn't done a lot of that. But this is, in fact, a deal in which he defied the progressives, most of the progressives in the caucus. He had, 46 come out against them, vote against. Elizabeth Warren said she'll vote against this. Bernie Sanders, I think, has said he'll vote against this. So they'll have some progressives in the Senate vote against this. And he avoided the trauma of a downgrade in the credit rating, shutdown of government, and a bigger mess.
Yeah, this was a very rare example of Joe Biden actually pushing back against his progressives. Of those 46 no votes on the House bill, 40 of them came from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, including its leader, Pramila Jayapal. They were very angry about many provisions that were in this bill. But the president, this will work to his benefit. It should work to his benefit. This is an example of him compromising. One of the first times that he has actually fulfilled what was a central campaign pledge. But here's the other thing that I think is why this is good for Joe Biden: the policies in it. Okay. I mean, to the extent that we are now going to be turning off the government spigots and that we may actually cut some spending, that might actually help some with inflation, for instance. Some of these other policies could be beneficial for the economy. And so in an odd way, he actually signed up for things that could help him with a re-election run if they too now feed into the economy. And so in that regard, I don't think that that was why he did it in the end. And I doubt he actually believes that because he doesn't have the right instincts on policies. But that could be one of the interesting consequences of this.
I think back to 2021, before the Senate was settled with those two Republican defeats in Georgia. My view was that if the Republicans had won those seats and kept the Senate, they only had to win one, that would have helped Biden because it would have lowered expectations on the left. He wouldn't have moved as far left as he did because he wouldn't have been able to. He would have had to negotiate with McConnell. Paradoxically, I think Biden would be in a better position than he is because he did move so dramatically left and refused to take on the progressives. This could help Joe Biden, believe it or not, as the presidential election campaign gears up. All right, Kyle Peterson, thank you. Kim Strassel, as always, to you both, thank you. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.